on budgets, I'm going to take the first 3 minutes and briefly go through this first page in notes on the objectives of doing a budget, what you want to get out of it. So the first thing is you need to know before you start making inventory, how much inventory do you need? And that's all going to set on how much do you think you're going to sell. And then we're going to see further as we go along, not only do we need to know how much we're going to sell, but we need to know how much do we already have in finished ending inventory, and how much do we want at the end of our current ending inventory to go into next month. That's all items we need to know. We're going to need to know how many people do we need to hire based on how much labor we're going to need, and we can find that, we can do all that with our budget calculations with just some initial upfront estimates. We got to know how many items we're going to sell. That's the biggest estimate that we have to be able to make, and if that's off, then everything else is going to be off. But if we can hone that in, then our budget should be pretty on par. So just like any other item, whenever you have something going on, not only a budget, but any kind of plan, you're going to think it through. You're going to write it out what you think you're going to do. You're actually going to then go and do it, have somebody supervise to see if everything's going as planned. And then finally, once the activity is over, you're going to refresh, look back, and see what went well, what maybe did not, and what can be improved upon. And that's the evaluation. In addition, when you're setting a budget, there's a fine line that you should be able to walk, in that if you set goals that are too far above this moderate line where you want to be at, your employees will begin to get discouraged. You're not going to have a perfect retention. Think of it like from a student basis, and the faculty are trying to get people either graduated or enrolled into the next semester. Expecting a faculty member to have 100% of their advisees enroll into the future semester is an unrealistic goal. Things are going to happen. People are going to lose their job. People are going to move away. It's unrealistic to expect 100%, but maybe 75 to 80% is an attainable goal. That would be that fine middle line. But setting too easy of goals is either going to cause A, employees not to work as hard, or B, you could lose some sales. As in the example that's given in the book with the Amazon Kindle. They didn't plan for enough inventory, therefore sales were above what they had, so they had to lose out on some sales. People weren't willing to wait as long as was needed to make more new inventory. The other piece about setting goals too easy is you give them $100 extra more than they need just in case. Well, they're probably going to spend it, because a lot of times if you don't spend it, then the next budget time, you're not going to get that extra $100. So if you go ahead and spend it, then in the future you may get it. Finally, when you're setting budgetary goals, you've got to make sure that you look at the company as a whole and not just one department, not just your own department, because you can't offer your employees incentives that may then hurt another division of your company, meaning you're going to give them product that another part of your company is already making. Therefore, they're going to have to give it away free. That's going to hurt their bottom line. If your incentive is going to be a deterrent to division number 2. All right, so when we're doing a budget, we're going to actually start in now and look at these budgets. The first one in your notes, I pretty much already have done for you. It's the sales budget. What it does, and it's one of the most important, and it's one of the most that is actually, you have to actually estimate. Most of the rest of the budgets have some finite numbers. You know exactly how much it costs to buy the materials, and we're going to be able to determine, and we know exactly how much materials we need to make our product. So this is the one that's going to have the biggest estimate, and that is how much sales are we going to make. Once we have that, we can go through and do pretty much everything else we need with very minimal estimates. So everything begins with sales. Most of the time you're going to want to look to past sales and see how you did, except if it's your first year, that's going to be tough to do. But even though if you look at past sales, there are a few other items you're going to want to be aware of that may affect upcoming sales. So the first one here If you already have a backlog in your finished goods, well, then you're probably not going to want to make as many new goods, even though you expect to sell 1,000. If you already have 400 in your backlog, you're not going to need to make another 1,000. You're going to need to sell those 400 first. And also a backlog may mean maybe your prior sales was a little too high, overestimated. Maybe you need to bring it down a bit. The other way then would be you expect to have a huge advertising promotion set up. That's going to hopefully bring in more sales than it was last year. So you may need to raise your expectation and produce a little bit more. Finally, you need to look at the economic conditions. Even schools like Ivy Tech have to do this. When there's a downturn in the economy, there's an upswing in people taking classes to hopefully try to get a better job that won't go away in a downturn. But then just the opposite, when the economy is doing well, people would rather work, and not as many then go to school to further their career. All right, so we're going to start a sales budget, and then we're going to work all the way down through to get to a complete income statement budget. This entire first lecture, we're going to do this in two parts: the income statement piece and then the balance sheet piece. This income statement piece deals a lot with the cost of goods sold. Once we have that, then the income statement, our very final budget, will just flow right through. There's not a whole lot left for us to do with this class. So our goal is to figure out, once we get the number of sales, what does it cost me to make that on a budgetary, so I can kind of see if I stay within budget. All right, so our first one here, the sales budget. We have to be given this information. We have to know, and this is the amount that is management the most critical to estimate. So I expect to sell 1,000 polo shirts, 500 capri pants, and 2,000 t-shirts. And then here's my selling prices that I expect to sell it for. And we're going to compare back later. We'll come back around and see if these sale prices were adequate based on our per item cost of goods sold. So in total, I expect to sell 64,000. This is going to be important for this section, our part one, the income statement, but it's also going to be important when we get to part two, into the balance sheet, and we'll continually reference back to this and other budget numbers. The next thing we need to do is a production budget. Just because I expect to sell 1,000 doesn't mean I need to make just 1,000. Maybe it's more or maybe it's less. It all depends on how much do I have in my beginning inventory and how much do I need or do I desire in my ending inventory at the end of the year. So in my little directions here, I'm telling us we want to bump up our ending inventory. Currently, we have only 1/10 of our sales in beginning inventory, but when we're done with this time frame, I'd like to have 1/4 of our total sales in ending inventory. Maybe expecting in the future we're going to be selling more right away. So in that case, I'm going to need to be making more than 1,000, more than 500, because I'm going to want my ending inventory to be a little bit higher than it was. So I can start out now my production budget. This is going to be the main number we're going to look at. Once we decide our sales is a good starting point, but it's the production budget that I'm going to base almost everything else off of. How many items do I really need to make, assuming I think I'm going to sell 1,000? So when I look at my production budget, first line I start out with is how many do I expect to sell? That's our good starting point. Now I'm going to add in, just like my little formula here shows, add in any desired ending inventory. And I told us that was 1/4. So 1/4 of our sales unit. And then I'm going to subtract out what I already have, my beginning inventory. Once I do that, I can easily do the math and figure out total units to be produced. Pretty simple. These are the numbers that I'm going to be referencing back to quite often throughout the rest of this lecture. I think as we go through these, you're going to see, oh, each budget as we do them, that's not too hard. Well, that wasn't very hard. It's when we get to seeing everything all laid out on one page, beginning information, which is what our in-class assignment will be, number 28. Then it looks initially overwhelming until you break it down just piece by piece and go through it slowly. You go through the sales budget, then you take that and go to the production budget. So far, it's not been that difficult. Now, if we're going to produce 1,150 items, I need then to know how much supplies am I going to need? How much of materials do I need to go out and buy? Well, before I know that, there's a couple things that I need to know. And these aren't necessarily estimates. These are pretty much known figures. How much material does it take to make one polo shirt? How much of that material do I already have? And how much do I want in my ending inventory? Just the same thing as my little formula up here. So we can, after we have done the little bit of research for our company to see how much it takes to make each type of item, I can go through and begin to set up a materials budget of how much I need to buy. So I know with a polo shirt, I'm going to be making, it takes 4 feet of material of this type A material. And then I tell us how much I have already and how much I want at the end. Capri pants, notice the capri pants and the polo shirt use the same material. We'll begin to merge those in a little bit, but at first we're going to go ahead and keep them separate. And then the t-shirts use a different material because these two materials do cost a little bit different per foot on a per foot basis. So I want to then decide how much of polo shirt A do I need? Material A. Okay, so if I'm going to make 1,150 shirts, that's for my production budget, and I know it takes 4 feet per shirt, that tells me that I need 4,600 feet of material A. And then I do the same thing for the capri pants, and I need another 1,725 of material A as well. And then just 6,900 feet for material B. And then I can go through and I know that's what I need. Now I need to do the formula up here, add in what I already have, and then subtract out or add in what I want to have at the end, and then subtract out what I already have in beginning inventory. So that's fairly simple to do. Take the 4,600, add in, this is what I want in the end when I'm all done. I already have 200, so I'm going to make just slightly less than the 4,600 that I'm going to need for production, because I already had a little bit more in my beginning inventory. And when we go through and do that for the capri and the t-shirts. Now it's at this point that I can go ahead and combine my type A, because I'm ready to go ahead and determine how much costs I'm going to incur. Well, for material A, I know I need 4,550 in feet, 1,675 more feet for material A. Combine those. So I need a total of 6,225 feet of material. And up here it tells me it costs 50 cents a foot. So in total, in my materials budget, I need to have $3,112.50 set aside for materials. Now go ahead and try this for part B. Pause the video for as long as you need, and I'm going to have you do this now from here on out. I'm going to have you pause as we go through. After I do one piece, see if you can do the next piece. All right, part B, 6,800 feet times 30 cents a piece. We do the simple math there, $2,040. In total then, for materials, I'm going to need over $5,000. This is going to come into play again later when I'm needing to do my cash budget and seeing how much money I'm going to be spending. All right, direct labor budget. I need to be able to determine how many employees I need, how many like full-time employees or part-time employees, So to be able to do that, I'm going to have to again do the research very similar to what I did up here by figuring out how much material I need. Down here, I need to be able to figure out how long does it take to make one item in each of my departments. And in making our clothing here, we have two departments, the cutting of the cloth and then sewing. And after seeing it done, we have determined that using the material A, it takes just a little bit longer because there's maybe more of it perhaps, so it takes 2/10 of an hour. And then material B, the t-shirts, it takes 1/10 of an hour. And we pay all of our people in the cutting department $10 an hour. Okay, we can begin to use all this information to make a labor budget. Sewing, it takes quite a bit longer for the nicer materials, material A, and then only 3/10 of an hour for the t-shirt, and we pay all of our people in the sewing $12 an hour. So now let's work through and determine how much labor do I expect, how much am I going to pay out in labor, and then finally we're going to look at how many employees does that include. Okay, so I'm going to show us this first one, and then I'm going to want you to try it for the other two. For the polo shirt, I expect to make, remember back up to our production budget, 1,150 units. And then just up here, I tell us the polo shirt uses A, material A, and in the cutting department, it takes 2/10 of an hour to make one unit. So if I'm going to make 1,150 units, how many hours is that going to make? How many hours is that going to use? So 230 hours in total this month. And then if it's 230 hours, how much is that going to cost me? Well, I pay my people $10 an hour. Therefore, those 230 hours are going to cost me $2,300. Now, at this point, go ahead and pause and do the same for the other two items. All right, here's the answers for the other two items for the cutting. Now, I would go ahead and pause again and do the exact same thing now for the sewing department. So this was the cutting department. Do the exact same thing. Now the only things that are going to be different is how much time it takes and then the cost per hour. So go ahead and pause and then try to do the sewing. Okay, here's the answers for the sewing area. You still got the same number of units. Now it takes 8/10 of an hour. So how many hours am I going to need if I make 1,150 units? 920 hours at $12 an hour. I'm paying my sewing people obviously quite a bit more because it takes quite a bit more time. All together, I want to go ahead and add up the two. The cutting department, $57.50, plus the $24,840, because this number I'm going to need when I go on to the balance sheet cash budget as well. Now, the other thing that I would like us to be able to determine is, now that I know how many hours I'm going to be using in each department, I want to know how many employees is that going to do I need? Do I need to go out and find 2 employees or 10 employees? And there's a real simple way we can do this. So let's go to the cutting. How many total hours am I going to need altogether? Because I'm going to assume if somebody can cut material A, they can probably cut material B too. So I'm going to look at this number here, the 575. I tell us in our instructions here that one person who's full-time will put in 160 hours a month. If one person puts in 160, how many people do I need for 575 hours? So I think the easiest way to do this one then is, first off, do the simple division, 575 hours over 160 hours per person. So you get 3 and then a decimal. Say it's 3.56. So you can't have 5/6 of a person, so we're going to need to have a part-time person. So what I would do is take the 3 cut off the decimal. That's how many full-time we need. And then take 3 times 160. When you take 3 times 160, you're going to get 480. So then I have to say, okay, 480 is 3 people. How many hours do I have left to fill if 480 are done with our 3 full-time? When I do the subtraction, 575 minus the 480, I'm left with 95 hours for our part-time person. Now go ahead and pause and try to do this for the sewing. Figure out how many employees do we need for the sewing and how much is left over for our part-time person. Okay, this is what I got for our sewing department. We needed 12 full-time people, almost within one more 10-hour interval. I could have used one more full-time, but it came out to be just under 13, 12.9 something or 12.8, a number high in the 8s. We come out to be, if you take 12 times 160, you're going to get 150 less than this, which would be 1920. So 1920, and then you subtract up how many you need in total, you get 150 hours remaining. That's our part-time person, almost enough for 160 for a full-time. All right, our factory overhead budget. So going back to even like week 1, week 2 of this class, we do, when we're talking about making things, everything goes into one of 3 categories: direct materials, direct labor, and now our final one, factory overhead, everything else, which includes indirect materials, indirect labor, and then any other miscellaneous items in the factory, like property taxes or depreciation. Some will be fixed, some will be variable. All right, so when it's a variable cost, usually like how you did in your project, you can get a decent estimate of how much indirect materials you use. You just know, I started off with $500 in paper clips, and now I'm down to only $100 in paper clips. So I know I use $400, but how do I know who should get what of that $400 cost? Which item should get what? Well, we're going to figure out, what we're going to do is get a per rate basis, and I'll show you what I mean. All right, so the first thing that I give you, and I'm going to make this small and you'll see why. This is what I give you for the variable costs. I tell us we have determined that we used $3,105 of indirect materials. And I want to be able to determine, my goal here is to determine, find out, and as you can see here in my little hint, find out what find the per hour rate. So if I use 3,105 hours, $3,105, and I have told us that all of our variable costs and even our fixed costs, any factory overhead, has got to be distributed based on something. And we're going to do it an easy way. We're going to say everything is distributed and handed out based on how many sewing hours you use for an individual product. So I come back up here and I can see that my sewing hours were 2,070 hours. So if I have 3,105 in indirect materials, I can then find what the hourly rate is to know for every hour I use in sewing, comes out to be $1.50 needs to be tacked on for variable costs for every hour that is used to make a product. Because all I did is take the 3,105 in indirect materials and simply divide that evenly among the total sewing hours. Now we're going to do the same thing. Go ahead and do the same thing for the other two variable costs. Divide their costs over by the total sewing hours. It's not hard to do, but it's good to go ahead and go through the exercise. It helps you remember what to do. Okay, so when I get these, they're not terribly difficult. They come out to be pretty nice, neat numbers. When we do the fixed, we don't want to do it on a per hour basis anymore. We want to do it more on a percentage. Because with the variable cost, for every hour I use, you get more and more costs involved. Well, with fixed costs, that's not the case because they are fixed. Just because you use another hour doesn't mean you use more accumulated depreciation. So what we're going to do is figure out how we're going to do a percentage based. We're going to come up here and say, for the sewing, they used 920 hours out of the total 2,070. So whatever the fixed costs are, they should get that percentage because they use that much of the sewing hours, which is our base determinant. We use 920 hours out of the 270. So when you do the math, here's our math. Well, let's go ahead and finish our variable costs. I forgot to do this. This is just on a per unit basis. So what I then need to do is our next step. This is step 1 here, figuring this out. So this is step 1. Step 2 then is to say how much indirect materials go to each unit. So indirect materials, it tells us it's $1.50 per hour. I use 920 hours because in the sewing department. So out of the 3,105, that they should get this much in cost. Capri pants, $690. T-shirts, $1,035. Go ahead and do that now for the other 2 items, and then let's check your answer. So go ahead and hit pause at this point and see if you can get the indirect labor and the factory overhead, or the utilities for the variable costs. All right, here's my answers for the other 2 items, plus, and then our final total variable costs. Doing the same thing, so indirect labor, they still have 920 sewing hours. That's our base, what we're going to continually use. 920 times the step 1, $3. And then this one is self-explanatory, 920 times $1. The 690, how we got that, we go back up here. They use 460 hours. 460 times $1.50 is how I got the 690. Okay, going back now to the fixed. Remember I said we're going to do this. It's probably makes the most sense to split this on a percentage basis. How much did my sewing use in total over the total amount of hours? So 920 over the 2,070. So the first thing I would do is just break everything down into percentages. The polo shirt, whatever the fixed costs are, they're going to get 44.4%. Capri and then the t-shirts get the rest. If you add all of these up, they do come out to be 100%. So with the supervisor salary, because we use 44.4% of the sewing hours and that's our base, we're going to take 44.4 and multiply it by this $3,500 of fixed costs. And we do that for all of the fixed costs. 500 times the 44.4, 1,500 times the 44.4, and then we can get the total fixed cost that should be allocated to the polo shirt. When I do this for all 3, I better get the same number over here that I do when I add up these 3 here. When I add up these 3, I get 5,500, and I also get 5,500 here. Now what we're going to do, now that we've got these broken down, total variable cost, total fixed cost, we're going to combine them to get our total overhead, because we're still doing overhead here. $16,885 in total overhead. And all I want to do now is I want to get an overhead rate that says for every hour that you use, remember there was 2,070 total, for every hour you use, you should tack on $8.16 of factory overhead expenses. You're going to need to be entitled to that. So whatever, however many hours you use in the sewing department, that's how much will go per hour to your department, to your clothing line. $8.16. We're going to use this again coming up. Now, maybe all three of these budgets that we just did, the materials, the labor, and now the factory overhead, these are all going to be very useful in our next part 2 section when we do the balance sheet. But now we're going to begin to put it all together because we want to determine what is our actual cost of goods sold. All of this did so far is tell us how much are we spending in cash. We're spending $5,500, or maybe not necessarily cash, but how much are we expensing out this year or utilizing this year? $11,385, $5,500, and then our labor. This is how much costs were incurred in total. Now we want to figure out not just what's in total, because total includes making ending inventory and using some of our beginning inventory, so it doesn't quite tell us exactly what our cost of goods sold are. I could make 30 extra units. That kind of a cost isn't going to go into my cost of goods sold because those are extra, those are still in ending inventory. Now those costs are going to go up here in these budgets, but I want to be able to figure out how much actual cost of goods sold did I have. So the first thing we want to do is break everything down on a per unit basis. How much does it cost to make one of each of these items? So cloth A, go back up to our materials. If I go back up to the materials, I can see that to make one polo shirt, it takes 4 feet, and each foot of material for material A costs 50 cents a foot. So when I go to the per unit, 4 feet times 50 cents a unit, I know the polo shirt is going to take $2 in materials. The capri pants, they take 3 feet of materials at 50 cents a piece, 50 cents per foot. So $1.50. The t-shirts, they also take 3 feet, but of the cheaper product. It's only 30 cents a foot. So we have 90 cents of direct materials for the t-shirt. Now let's go through the labor. I'll do the first one, you do the next two, or the next one, because we only have 2 departments. We got our cutting. It tells us for the cutting department, to make the polo shirt, it takes 2/10 of an hour for 1 unit. And it costs $10 an hour in total to pay my employees. So if I do the math then, $10, and it only takes 2/10 of an hour. So for every shirt that's made, $2 is going to labor. Same thing with capri pants. It takes 2/10 of an hour. The t-shirt only takes 1/10 of an hour. So it's only $1. Now do the same thing for the sewing and see what you get. Go ahead and pause. All right, for the sewing, this is what you should have gotten. $9.60. Since the capri and the polo are the same, they are going to have the same cost as well. The t-shirt, remember that was only 3/10 of an hour, so that's why it's a lot less. Still the same charge per hour though, 12 bucks an hour. Now the factory overhead, we just determined what it is on a per hour basis, $8.16, based on a per sewing hour basis. So the polo shirt, remember how much time it takes for sewing, it takes 8/10 of an hour. So we're going to do the simple math then. 8/10 of an hour times this is what the hourly rate of overhead that needs to be applied. So per hour, we're going to tack on $6.53. Same with the Capri because they had the same time frame for sewing that takes the same amount of time. T-shirts take quite a bit less. So when you look at the costs added up now, the materials are a very small part. Even the direct labor is a very small. Well, when you add all the direct labor, it's a big part, but just one piece of it was small. But the materials here, direct materials, small part. A lot of your costs are tacked on right here in your factory overhead. That's why it's always extremely important to try to get that as low as possible. Now we can simply add everything up and compare it to our per unit sale prices. I think these were, we can go, let's go back up. So this is $20.13 of cost. If you go way back up to the sales, I'm selling it for $26. So that's good. That's a good profit margin there, from $20.13 up to 26. Let's compare the last one here too. 13 sale price, and I figured it cost me $7.95. So again, that's a good profit. Now all I need to do is figure out what my cost of goods in total are. If this is what it costs to make one unit or to sell one unit, how much does it cost to sell? And then I need to go back up to my sales, not the production anymore, not the 1,150, but the actual sales of 1,000. So it costs, I need to make 1,000, I'm going to sell 1,000 units, and this is what it costs for one unit to sell. So over 1,000, this is how much it cost me in cost of goods sold. Capri and t-shirts for a total cost of goods sold of $45,845. Now I can compare this to my total sales number and begin my income statement. Remember from the very first budget, I had sales of $64,000 less my cost of goods sold. I can now determine what my gross profit is. And then I can simply take away all of the expenses. And that's what these are. I just give us these. This isn't part of what this class is all about. This class is all about determining the factory work, how much it costs to make the product. This is all the ancillary outside the factory costs. So these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in my income statement, but I'm going to lump them all together. You can separate them out if you want, but that's not really the point of this class. I'm just going to call them all selling and admin expenses and put them all together. So let's make our income statement. We just talked about this far, taking our sales minus our cost of goods sold, tells us how much money we're making just on the product alone. Then I'm going to subtract out all of my selling and admin. So all of these costs together give us $9,300. When I take my gross profit minus all of the selling and admin expenses, I'm left with a profit of $88.55, and we call that income before tax, or net income before tax. Because now this is the number that you take by 30%, a very high rate. 30% of that goes to the government. So of my profits of the $88.55, $26.56 goes right to the government. So I subtract that out, and this is my final real net income. At this point now, you should be able to do the entire income statement steps in order to get all of our budgets ready to do this. And we will then go through number 28 in class. Again, this is part 1. We will start part 2 either beginning at the end of this class period and most likely continuing into the next class period, depending on time. That is all, and we will start lecture number 2 on another lecture.